Okay, good evening, everyone. So what a I don't get to do this too often. So when Hope asked me to do this a few weeks ago, it was with a lot of mental anguish, uh, and but I really felt that you know this was a sort of subject that cuts across. It's a subject that a lot of us relate to, and I'm privileged because it's mental health is something it's a part of my everyday practice as well. Just by way of introduction, my name is Dapor. I'm a father of three. Um, I'm a member of Harvest City for many years now, and like Hope said, I am a part of the youth team as well. Um, uh, what I do is that I'm actually a pediatric psychiatrist, a doctor whose specialist or specialization is in the area of child mental illness and mental wellness. So, Hope asking me to speak today is not surprising, but I thought I could bring some insights. I'll be sharing a number of slides with you today, and what I hope over the next 30, 40 minutes is to sort of bring you my own thoughts on mental health and wellness, and also hopefully we might have an opportunity to share questions or have you ask questions. Uh, I hope I'll be able to answer some of them. Um it's very interesting because um, as we look at this, I look at our, our scriptures and how scriptures lead us into mental issues around mental wellness and mental health. And I'm kind of struck by how a lot of the evidence we actually take in mental health actually has scriptural basis. So, for example, Proverbs 13 talks about how, as a man thinks, that's exactly how he is. And I know that some of the strategies we use in treating mental illness would have to do with how we shape our thoughts, how we change our thoughts. And I was like, oh, that was in the Bible. Huh, maybe they were just all taking cues from the Bible. Uh, Proverbs 4 talks about guarding our hearts with diligence. And so there's a lot of evidence for how the Bible Times talks about, mental illness and, even staying well as well. So to kickstart today, I am going to, next slide, talk about the two vignettes. And I want you to keep them at the back of your mind. And I'm going to be asking you at the end what you think the sort of what's going on with the characters represented in this vignette. So this first vignette is a 15-year-old student who used to be outgoing and friendly, had good grades, stable family life, but about a few months ago, they fell out of their social network, and in addition, they experienced the loss of a very significant relationship. Um, Following on, they became withdrawn, spent a lot of time in their room, or have been spending a lot of time in their room, have started skipping school, and their grades have started to decline. So, as a background, they used to be a honor roll student. So, the parents report that they have been sleeping up to 15 hours a day. But even at that, they're still reporting being very tired and finding it hard to get going. Um, they disclosed to one of their colleagues recently that they have been thinking whether being alive is worth it. And our parents have also found fresh cuts on their arms. Okay, so just think about that vignette for a bit, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Okay, next slide. So the second vignette, um, is a 34-year-old woman who is struggling to go to work. Recently, she was promoted to a sales executive, a job that involves giving presentations to potential clients. Now, as a child, she was described as an introvert who had only a few friends and did not like playdates. In high school, she skipped classes on days when she had to give a presentation. At the start of each school year, she would complain of having tummy aches to her parents, so that sometimes she would be quite distressed at school that she would hide away in the bathroom or ask her parents to come pick her up. When the parents obliged her, she would be quite relieved of her symptoms. Going into the workplace, she dreaded work get togethers and would make excuses not to attend. She also dreaded family functions and would make excuses not to attend. She also dreaded large family gatherings and started to worry about losing her job because she did not feel she was coping. Again, okay, bear those two vignettes in mind, and at the end, you're probably going to give me your own perspective of what might be going on with these folks. Okay, so let's dive quickly into it. So, next slide, please. All right, now God cares about every aspect, every detail about us. Uh, we are special to Him. How do I know that? Next slide. Bible talks about how God wants us to prosper and be in health, just as our soul prospers. 3 John. Now, it says prosper, it says be in health, as our soul prospers. So it's talking about a variety of things, not just physical health, soul health prospering, doing very well in every aspect of our life. So it just gives us a synopsis that, God cares about every aspect of our being. Next slide, please. Okay. Another one says, I knew you before I formed you in my mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart, appointed you as my prophet to the nations. That was God talking to Jeremiah at that time. So, next slide. God understands our infirmities. Okay, next slide. And I thought to myself, really? And for some people, I think that things become so despairing that they really can't relate to how God might even think that they're going through tough times. But I know that there's evidence of distress and turbulence and emotional upheaval, even in Bible times. So think about David. Next slide, please. So Psalm 3, actually. Psalm 3, David described a lot of guilt. As we know, David was someone who was acquainted with a lot of difficulties, sorrows, guilt. He felt he did a lot of sinful things. It was a man who was quick to repent, but there was a lot of anguish in sometimes expressing himself. So in Psalm 3, he described his guilt as overwhelming, like a burden that was too heavy to carry. In Psalm 42, he questioned why his soul was so downcast and why he was so disturbed within himself. Next slide. Okay, sorry, no. Elijah was another person. So if we recall, Elijah had in 1 Kings chapter 19, he had, in the previous chapter, he had an encounter with the prophets of Baal and had triumphant victories over them. And then in chapter 19, the scripture records that Ahab had gone to report some of Elijah's deeds to Jezebel. And Jezebel had threatened him. And all of a sudden, he felt so scared. And the Bible records how he said, I've had enough, Lord. Take away my life, for it's better for me to die. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Take away my life. I'm not better than my ancestors. Jonah was another man who appeared to have experienced anguish. He was sent to Nineveh. He didn't want to go. He ran away. And when he was eaten up by the fish and repented, he eventually went and spoke to Nineveh. And then the people of Nineveh repented. And then he was angry. It's like, God, I knew you were going to forgive these people. And he was so angry that he was so angry to the point that he felt his life was in despair. Take away my life, for it's better for me to die than to live. Now, if someone comes to me in the emergency room and says, take away my life, for it's better for me to die than to live, I'm like, Nurse, can we admit him? So, you know, people were suicidal, or so it seems to me, even from back then. Next slide. Job. Job was a man who was acquainted with a lot of distress, a lot of difficulties. If you recall, he'd lost his family, he'd lost his children, he's lost his livelihood, all his belongings, because um, God was very sure that even if he was tested, he would stand firm. But like a lot of us who might have experienced loss, difficulties at work, difficult circumstances in life, breakups, breakthroughs, oh sorry, breakups, breakdowns, or whatever life throws at us, it is not impossible to despair. And Job was not any different. Job 3, he said, why did I not perish at birth? Why did I have to go through all of this? You know, why didn't I die as I came from the womb? What a terrible things to say, but it shows how in despair he was, and it's not very difficult to understand the circumstances he was at that time. It would have also said in Job 3:26, I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, but only turmoil. I loathe my very life. Therefore, I will give free rein to my complaint and speak in the bitterness of my soul. This clearly sounded like a troubled person. Now, who would have said, okay, this was olden times, and maybe because they were prophets of old, but then it came to Jesus. Jesus? Jesus too felt this way? Yeah, absolutely. Now, the weight of crucifixion was upon him. He knew what was coming. He knew that, things were going to get really tough, and having to bear the weight of the sins of the world upon his shoulders was just going to be a very difficult time. Hear what he said. He said, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch, he was saying to his disciples then. And then the Bible goes on to say that he went a little beyond them and fell to the ground and began to pray, that if it were possible, the hour might pass him by. And he was saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible by you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So, quite a lot of anguishing stories in biblical times. And I think these all point to the fact that God relates to our infirmities, because these are things that have happened way before time. It's not new, and he's a very present help. Next slide, please. I'm going to look at some definitions and coming back to our own everyday experience here. So, how do we define health? Now, WHO says it's a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not just, I don't have an illness, I don't have a disease, I don't have headache, therefore I'm healthy. No, it's way more than that. And again, if we look at one of the earlier quotes I said there, how the Bible says that I wish that above all you be in health and prosper just as your soul prospers. I think that mimics what the WHO definition of health is saying there. A complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. Mental well-being, a balance of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. Mental illness, when you have disturbances in the way we think, in the way we act, in the way we feel, and in the way we perceive emotions that affects our everyday functioning, then it may be likely that there's a mental illness going on. And the truth of the matter is that without mental health, there is no physical health. Again, very much in line with scriptures, because we know that we're whole beings and we're not just one part or the other. All right, next slide, please. All right, how much is this burden we're talking about? Quite a lot of people struggle. So if we think about numbers, 13% of the world are living with mental illness tends to be commoner in females than in males. And the most prevalent mental health disorder is anxiety disorders. I think there are sessions on anxiety in the following sessions. And then the next most prevalent is depression. All right. Again, with youth mental illness, it's not any different. I think 1 in 5 kids at some point in time would have had some sort of mental health symptoms in the past, and the majority of them will not be treated or will go unnoticed. All right, next slide. All right. So just some stats from Canada. Again, very similar to what I was saying there. In a given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experience, and at 40 years of age, 1 in 2 have had or have mental illness. For young people, 15 to 24 are the most likely age group to experience mental health issues, and approximately 1.2, which approximates to about 1.2 million children and young people. Okay. So some of the predictors of mental illness are physical disabilities. Again, it stands to reason when there's a lot of pain and anguish, whether it's from physical distress, whatever, there's a high chance of there being a comorbid mental illness. So essentially, people who have had long-term physical health conditions are more likely to have mental health conditions. Again, that just stands to reason. Okay. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is just to give us sort of an idea of the variety of mental health problems that that can exist across the spectrum of life. So from neurodevelopmental to neurocognitive developments, neurocognitive disorders, and everything in between. Of course, the commoner ones are the affective disorders and the anxiety disorders, which you see on top. BPAD is bipolar disorder. Sorry for the abbreviation. Next slide. So what causes mental illness? Why do people become unwell? There is no one straightforward answer. And we often talk about the biopsychosocial model of illness, and as well as the biopsychosocial model of recovery. So essentially what that is saying is that many things come together to play to eventually to give the picture that we have. So this is just something that come off the top of my head now, but if I look at Elijah and why he got to that point, a man who is so resilient, who's fought so many wars, who has done so many miracles, all of a sudden he gets to a point of despair. I can imagine that maybe there's some personality vulnerabilities there. Maybe in his family there were people who struggled. So genes can play a part. Age, as we grow older, the tendency is that there can be the chances of mental illness increases as you age. Right? Nutrition, disability. So then we talk about the psychological factors as well, ways of coping, attitudes to stresses or the things that we confront in life, emotions, behavior, our temperament, our personality. These are all psychological factors. And of course, the social factors. So our social supports, our family, work, our network, including church. This is a big one for a lot of us. This is where a lot of us anchor our hope and our support. And there's a lot of evidence to say how spirituality plays a big role in wellness or in mental wellness. Okay, next slide. So in terms of our biological risk factors, again, the age and gender, like I was saying earlier on, the female gender has a higher preponderance to mental illness than the male. Genes do play a factor as well. We see some families where certain mental illnesses run through families, especially depression, anxiety, even dementias. Um, yeah, I'm gonna throw a teaser here. The commonest, uh, anyone who knows this will. I'm gonna throw some price out there. Um, what is the most heritable mental health condition? Anyone knows? No, no, no. Close. Who said bipolar? Yeah, no, it's very close. No, it's a childhood illness. It is ADHD. Yeah, it is ADHD. Yeah, that's the most heritable mental health condition you have. So I see a lot of them. In fact, it's interesting, once I see a kid who's got ADHD, the next thing I'm looking at is where are the parents? Because almost always, so genes play, what I'm just stressing out there is the genes play a big role. And sometimes, um, in some certain illnesses like schizophrenia and sorry, like ADHD and bipolar disorder, genes play a very big role. All right. Medical conditions we talked about, and then sometimes lifestyle, poor sleep, poor diet, lack of exercise, all those things can play a role. Right. Next slide, please. All right. There are psychological factors as well. Um, uh, Trauma. Um, in mental illness now, the big mantra is trauma informed care, because a lot of people we're now realizing have become victims of trauma, and obviously trauma perpetuates and sort of continues to play havoc in various aspects of life. So uh, obviously, we see a lot of drive from the church, even to address long-standing traumas and things like that. But with trauma can bring um, uh, can bring a risk for mental illness. For example, um, uh, the child who has been severely neglected, who has experienced uh, physical abuse or even sexual abuse, it's very easy to see how many other problems will continue to probably become evident in this kid's life. Okay. Um, Family issues are very prevalent. Divorce, domestic violence, um, and not only does so for example for domestic violence, not only does it affect the partners involved, the kids who witness it also are um, significantly affected from things like that. In childhood mental health, there's something we call adverse childhood events, and witnessing domestic violence is one of them. And we know those are predictors of mental illness or poor outcomes in those children. Right? So, families where there is sort of friction and lack of cohesion, so where there's poor parent-child relationship, where there's lots of yelling or screaming or very high expressed emotions, um, or where there's lots of harshness in parenting, all those things are all factors or risk factors for developing mental illness. Right? Okay, some people, personality styles are also prone to negativity, hopelessness, or again, all those things drive um, mental illness. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through all of that, but it stands to reason. I might just touch about on immigration. One of the, not saying it's the only one, but uh, I like the fact that our church is a multicultural, quite welcoming. Um, yeah, because immigration, unfortunately, is a risk factor for people becoming unwell. Why? Because there's isolation. People are lost in a foreign country, language barriers, unemployment. all of those things can create lots of stresses. And when stresses and anguish become high enough, people can start to show evidence of mental illness. All right. Okay. And again, I think immigration and all of that can tie into stressful life events as well. Now, if we are talking about mental illness, what are some of the things we are going to be looking out for? How do we know people may be exhibiting symptoms of mental illness? Next slide. All right. So, yeah, sadness is very common. I'm going to talk about sadness a little bit. All right. Now, obviously, sadness is a very common emotion. Um, when does it become significant? It's when it's pervasive, right? What do I mean by that, right? So when people become sad and the prevailing emotion is sadness, they don't experience joy, and it's gone on for several weeks, and it goes on and on. There's no relenting periods of, feeling happy. Well, that may become a problem. Okay, so persistent feelings of sadness, um, withdrawal from friends and activity. Um, uh, there's something called anhedonia in mental illness. Anhedonia is the inability to enjoy things that people derive pleasure in. So, for example, my kids love sports, right, Ebon? Right? Yeah, they love sports, right? And uh, I'm going to share the story. So, a few years ago, I just noticed one of my kids, they'd started, um, they just became more isolative, and, you know, they were just cooped up in the room all the time. And, you know, they were a very exuberant, outgoing personality. And these changes were very uncharacteristic for them. And so one of the things that became evident was, they were backing away from everything that was meaningful and dear to them. Uh, it helped us to understand that, they were struggling, and we could reach out and get them help. All right. So some people, it's the excessive fears or worries. Now, it's not unusual to worry or to fear. So, for example, I'm coming here today and I'm thinking of, a few weeks ago, Hope said, you're going to try and do this session for us. I'm like, oh my God. Last night, I don't like the spotlight thing. And Hope knew I was anguished about what she was asking me to do. Was I fearful? Yes. Do I look like it now? No. But inside me, my heart is like doing that. Okay. Was I worried? Absolutely. Because I was thinking, what am I going to say? People are going to judge me. They're going to look at me awfully, and all kinds of things. Some of those feelings are not odd or unusual, especially for the circumstance. Now, when it's excessive, most people will not experience those kind of feelings in those kind of situations. So, for example, I need to go to the store, and I would rather not go to the store and my grocery is left undone and my shelf is empty and my kids don't have food just because I'm too afraid to go out. That is a whole level of excess fear, right? Okay, so or I can't go to school because I just can't stand being in the hallways and my friends will make fun of me. I don't have any friends there. I look awkward. And today there is a class presentation coming up. I have to, it's worth 60% of my grades, but nah, I can't do it. I'm staying at home. That is a whole level of fear that, yeah. And of course, Elijah was like so terrified, he went and said, let me die. That is a significant level of fear, all right? So other things you might experience, some people experience confusion, memory changes, they can't concentrate. Now, when you're preoccupied with a lot of gunk going on in the head, it's very hard to focus on what you have to do. So we often find that the concentration is poor, and yeah, sometimes it's also that their moods are unstable. Next slide, please. Okay, eating habits might change. So, for example, people who struggle with eating disorders or even who have a depressive illness, they may just stop eating. Some people may eat more because that's how they're going to cope with illness. All right. Same thing with sleep patterns. Either you're sleeping too much, or you may sleep not, or you may stop sleeping entirely at all and be so tired. Um, for adults or those who are in relationships, there may be changes in their libido, um, tiredness, low energy. We talked about. Uh, and again, the drive to do things, especially the things that they did well without problems before, can become quite problematic. Some people, the manifestation of illness is changing personality, where they can become really grumpy. Sometimes that's teens for you, but uh, uh, sometimes when that gets a little bit too excessive, you begin to wonder what's going on. All right. What happens if we just leave things unchecked? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it can progress to suicidal thinking. Unfortunately, suicide is still common in Canada. Uh, about 3,600 deaths in a year. Still one too many. But unfortunately, sometimes it can progress to actually people thinking about and actually hurting themselves. Um, uh, of course, because we're social, we interact with people. If people don't understand what's going on, it can start to lead to conflict. People cope in various ways, sometimes in ways that are not healthy, and may start using substances. All right. Um, Other things that might happen is that people can start to detach from reality. I remember speaking one of the was a forum in church, and it was a panel discussion, and the one of the presenters there was sharing the experience about mental illness and how in my mind obviously they become quite depressed. They ended up being hospitalized, but they were talking about how uh, they started having very unusual beliefs about I forget what it was now, but essentially they had started to detach from reality. Their thinking had become paranoid, and it was just a manifestation of illness in that situation. All right. Good news is that some of these things can be treatable. All right. Sometimes mental illness can present as physical illness. Again, I go back to what I said earlier on, how God desires us to be in health, just as every aspect of our lives prosper, our soul and our body. Now, I see kids very often, or I see people with mental illness very often talk about what we call somatic symptoms. I have a headache, I have muscle ache, my tummy is aching. I have seen people come into the hospital to evaluate a heart attack, but it's just that their nerves are so frayed and they're so short. So, of course, we got to make sure everything is looked at. Not just the one aspect of your health. And once there isn't any explanation for those physical symptoms, well, we kind of start thinking, is there a psychological aspect to it? All right, next slide, please. All right. So when things are left untreated and things are not and mental health is left unchecked, uh, you can imagine in kids delinquency, challenging behaviors, not achieving their full academic potential, even as they go into adulthood, employment opportunities are lost, productive years are lost. Next slide, please. Family discord issues, issues with self-harming, or even attempting suicide and premature death. All right, that's all fun stuff. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now, yes, all these things happen, but does that mean there's no, what's the way out of this? All right. Um, Again, we look at the biopsychosocial model and uh, just thinking about the biological aspect, making sure that if your medication, that you're taking your medications regularly or checking up with your physician or your healthcare provider, lifestyle changes, meaning if you're slouched up in bed and struggle to keep going, just scheduling daily activities for yourself or, exercise, diet, things like that. Okay. Um, the the psychological interventions that have been known to be helpful, uh, there are various therapies. Now, again, this isn't about the scope of this talk is not about talking about the various therapies, but again, it all depends on what's going on. So, for example, family therapies can be very helpful in situations where there's family discord. Um, uh, Anyone who knows what CBT is? CBT? What does it mean? It is. Do you know what it means?
Where your thinking influences your feelings, or like your thoughts and then your actions, and it's a cycle.
You've done psychology before. You've taken a psychology class, right? Yeah, it's very obvious. Yes, she's absolutely right. Yes. So essentially, it looks at cognitive, which is your thinking, and your behaviors and how that affect illness. So I'll give you a vignette, or I'll give you an example. Um, let's say I'm friends with what's your name? Margaret, and I happen to haven't seen Margaret for some time, and then I run into Margaret, but she just walks off. She just walks off. She doesn't say hello. She doesn't acknowledge anything. And I'm like, why would Margaret do that? She mustn't like me. I must have done something wrong. What did I do? This is bad. Nobody likes me. You get the drift? And then what do? I go to my bed and I crawl up like Elijah and I say, I want to die. All right? Now, same scenario. I see Margaret and I say, she just walks off. That's odd. Margaret doesn't do that. Maybe I should go check on Margaret. Or maybe I should call one of our friends. Let's check up on her. Okay. And so, in the second scenario, I go home and I tell my mom, hi, man, Margaret, but you know, mom, she wasn't looking her best today. I'm a little bit worried about her. Do you think anything is wrong? What should we do? All right. Two scenarios, same situation. All right. How is the first person going to feel? How are they going to feel? Paranoid? Sad, exactly. Rejected, absolutely. Right? Anyway else. And what are the things they're likely going to do? You feel paranoid, you feel sad, you feel depressed. What are you going to do? Isolate? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Isolate? Yeah. They may comfort it, absolutely. Yeah. They. How can Margaret do that to me? She's ruining my life, and so on and so forth. Yes. So essentially, what CBT does is to look at those automatic ways that we think that aren't helpful and some of the ways we behave in line with our thinking that aren't helpful and start looking at ways of changing that. It's a very powerful treatment model. But it's very interesting. I was talking about how some of these models are actually biblically based. In the beginning, I was talking about how, as a man thinks, so he's going to be. So if you think crap, you get what I'm trying to say. So if your thinking is a little bit malaligned, you're going to likely behave that way. And then, so when the Bible says guard your heart with all diligence, it also means you're going to do everything you can to guard against thoughts that are going to negatively affect you or drag you down. All right, so CBD has a lot of evidence in mental illness, and I think it's very scripturally based as well. So others, wow, okay, other sort of social, other sort of management strategies. Again, school support. Lots of kids, we see them struggle with various aspects of school. Maybe they struggle with ADHD or delinquency or drug use. How can we help them catch up? How can we help them integrate? How can we help them manage the anxiety at school? Yeah. Um, Parent skills training. So, parenting can be very difficult. Anyone agrees? See how many people agree with me? But there is no other job I would rather do than be a parent, especially to my three wonderful kids. So it is challenging, but that it's absolutely rewarding as well. But some people struggle with, how do I do this? How do I do that? Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Doesn't fit. All right. So how do I do this? How do I do that? But in essence, there are lots of training techniques there to buffer parenting skills. And it's not I tell parents all the time, this is not a failure on your part. This is, going to the school of learning to address aspects that you find challenging, which can be anyone, really. The social aspects of staying well also will include things like your religious affiliation, your family support, education, employment, things like that. Okay. I wanted to quickly talk about emotional health. I'm going to transit through this in 5 minutes so that we get about 10 minutes to ask questions or throw things out there. I may not be able to answer all of them, but all right. Emotional wellness, being kind to yourself as you recognize and experience a wide range of emotions. Experiencing emotions it's probably the order of the day, as we've probably all learned. All right, but being able to stay well is being able to cope with those range of emotions without necessarily forming maladaptive ways of dealing with them. So it may be evidenced by maybe the ability to talk with someone about your emotional concerns and share your feelings with others. Being able to say no. That's not a bad thing all the time. Of course, don't say no all the time. But being able to say no and assert yourself when the situation calls for it and not feeling guilty about that. Being able to feel content, feeling you have a strong support network, i.e., people in your life that care about you, being able to relax, or feeling good about who we are. All right. A quick check of emotional wellness. Next slide. All right. Is stress something you can learn from or something to avoid? Are you aware of bodily sensations, emotions, and behaviors when you're stressed? Do you allow yourself to experience emotions just as they are? Do you care for yourself on a daily basis? Are you able to ask for help when you need it? So these are just some of the ways we can check, are we really, in a good emotional place? I wanted to talk very quickly now on the mental health continuum. Between the mental health continuum stretches from, I don't know if you can see that, yeah? Stretches from the healthy to the ill. And these are all a range of emotions and behaviors that that you would exhibit when people are from healthy to the ill. What strikes me on the right side of that is on the ill aspect, you're beginning to see functional problems. So now they can't do work, they can't perform their duties, whether that's school or work. Um, uh, they associations or going out in public, or they become impaired with doing all of that. Aggression, angry outburst, all things like that. So how do we manage various aspects of our mental health in all these stages? All right, next slide, please. All right. Taking care of ourselves means that we are able to introspect, look inwards, and say, how did I get here? Or how have I been able to stay well? All right. So we can learn things to uh, that decrease. That's wrong, actually. We can learn factors that decrease our mental, becoming mentally unwell, and increase factors that improve our well-being. Next slide. Uh, if we are in the healthy zone, we want to focus on tasks that we have to do, breaking things into manageable parts so that they don't become overwhelming. Um, uh, Nurture a support system. Deep breathing, control deep breathing. Next slide. If you are in the reacting zone, uh, it suggests you should recognize your limits and start to take breaks because things are starting to go a little bit awry there. Get enough rest. Okay. Reduce barriers that discourage you from seeking help. Identify and resolve problems early and take accountability of your behaviors or actions. Right, next slide. When you are in the injured zone, please talk to somebody. Make self-care your priority. Get help sooner. Don't do it later. Don't put it off. Do it now. Okay? Maintain your circle of influence and contact. Next slide. In the ill zone, hope at that stage you definitely need interventions. And my recommendation is to follow the care that you've been recommended, to seek help and consultation as you need to. There will be resources and you should know them and access them. Could be mental health resources, resources through your family, doctors, through your local emergency room, and things like that. Okay, I'm going to just kind of stop there. Let's skip to the end. Okay. All right. Oh, no, go back. No. That's ah. All right. So that first vignette, I suppose you all saw the answer. Huh? They blinked. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So that first vignette, does anyone remember what the vignette was? The 15-year-old who is isolating, who's lost some social relationships. They're now not doing very well at school. Premorbidly, they were doing well before. So what do you think is going on? Depressed, exactly. All right. Okay. That second vignette was a 34-year-old who is anxious about work, and they're struggling because now they have to um, they have to perform at a level that they are feeling very difficult. They are feeling that they can't cope with. Historically, they didn't do well with social situations, and they would skip school and have tummy aches when they have to engage in social encounters. And now they're worried. Now I'm going to lose my job. What do you think is going on? Anxiety. All right. Okay. That's absolutely right. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to really stop there. It's too much talking. All right. I'm going to just open the floor over the next 10 minutes for questions or just let anyone ask questions if you have any questions. But thank you very much. Oh, Margaret? Yeah.
How do you, in your practice, how do you look after yourself? Yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought it wasn't going to be about me. Wow. Okay. Now, I have a feeling my daughter is going to judge me with my answers because they always tell me look after myself. But I'm going to give an answer that I think reflects what I do. So, and if it's not, she should raise up her hand and say it's not. Okay. So, um, back when I started, I had a um, there was so much pressure to try and fit everybody in that I didn't think I minded time very well. And so I over leveraged myself. But also, there were other pressures of life, like meeting your financial obligations and things like that. So actually, instead of working less, I was working till 10 or 11 p.m. And my kids would complain and say, "Hey, I don't see you. My daddy's not home." And so over time, I began to reflect, what could I do differently? Um, I've made significant changes, which means now that I'm home almost every weekend. I'm home in the evenings. So I found sort of a work-life balance that works for me. My community is very important to me as well. I spend a lot of time in with my network of friends. Church is really, really important to us as a family as well. We have a lot of connections here. Um, so between our community, between finding a better work-life balance, I think I found better management for myself. Yeah, that was a tough one. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Your name?
Kathy.
Kathy. Thank you.
I've heard another expression called victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is prevalent in the young generation. So, is that something that's kind of being more and more common, or is it just another name for things like paranoia?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. First of all, victim mentality is not, it's not, there's no definition in the books of mental illness that says this is victim mentality. So I suppose I would categorize it as a behavior. All right. And with any behavior, I think behaviors are purposeful. I always ask myself, why is this person behaving this way? Rather than labeling it this or that, I ask myself, why is this happening, or why is this person behaving this way? I think that if I understand why, it may give me insights into how to help that person. My worry is if I say you are presenting in a victim mentality, person is going to be offended and they're going to climb up, and you're never going to have an opportunity to explore why they got to that position. Actually, sometimes what they are trying to say in that situation may actually have a lot of validity if we just sat down and really paid attention to what's going on. But if we labeled it victim mentality, my worry is that people are going to come to feeling judged. And when people feel judged, guess what happens? They close up. And then help goes farther and farther away from them. Whether their concerns are valid or really they really need to just pull up their socks, we will never be able to explore them. So this is people I think we need to reach out grace to and try to really help understand the experience. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
I can shout.
Yep. Lovely.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
I learned quite a lot. Okay. The slide, one of the things you advise one can do is meditation.
Yeah.
There are a lot of definitions out there about meditation, but maybe from personal experience, you know, the more Christian accepted way of meditation, just to be sure of exactly what it should be like.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Tell me about that Christian accepted way of meditation you're talking about.
Um, Sometimes meditation, you can, whether, whether it's going to a trance or just to be sure
Okay.
exactly what meditation is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually meditation. It's evidence based, and for people who practice meditation, it's not like you're in a trance or anything like that. It's a state of um, so, for example, even if you look at scriptures, how we do, so when they say meditate on scriptures, so you sit down with it, all the distractions are gone, you're focused on just what is in front of you and really reflecting on it and thinking how it relates to you and all of that. It's very similar in that situation where, so for example, if you're in a meditational practice, most times you're putting away the cares of this world. You're just in a state of, I suppose, in a state of calmness. And so you're not worrying about things. You're not thinking about all those things that distract you. It's not like you're in a trance no, it's not. It's not that. But there are actually practitioners who practice meditation, and it's evidence-based. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, your attention. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.